That night, my passenger staggered out of a Beverly Hills mansion, wearing a battered leather hat, more rings than fingers, and smelling strongly of cheap rum. He opened the car door, looked at me with a crooked half-smile, and said, "Captain Jack Sparrow on duty." I laughed, of course. I thought, another crazy guy thinking he's Johnny Depp. But what he did in the next few minutes, there was no acting at all. He told me a behind-the-scenes Hollywood story that was too absurd to be made up. And to this day, I don't know if I took a crazy person home, or if, for 30 minutes, I had a race with Johnny Depp himself disguised as himself. If you enjoy strange, unlikely stories that may or may not be true, leave a like and subscribe to the Backseat Secrets channel. Stay until the end because what this guy told me will leave you as confused as it left me that night. My name is Travis. I live in Los Angeles. I've been driving for Uber and Lyft for about 3 years, and honestly, I've seen it all. Naked people, couples fighting, backseat marriage proposals. But that night, something was off from the start. It was Saturday, almost 2 a.m. The city had that classic end-of-a-night vibe, loud laughter coming from bars, the smell of fast food, and the occasional drunk throwing up on the sidewalk as if it were part of the routine. I just left a couple fighting outside a hotel and was ready to call it a night. I was already tired, my tank was almost empty, and so was my patience level. But then a ride popped up on the app. Origin, Beverly Hills. The passenger's name? It just said J. No last name, no photo, just the initial. I considered ignoring it, but the fare was high, and curiosity has always been my worst flaw. I took the race. As soon as I accepted the ride, I noticed the starting point was one of those gigantic houses hidden behind automatic gates, high up in Beverly Hills. You know the kind of mansion you only see in movies? A white columned entrance, soft yellow lights, and a silence so absolute that even the app's sounds seemed disrespectful. The curious thing was that, despite the luxurious address, the passenger's profile was as generic as possible. Just the letter J, as a name, no photo, and the type of account that appeared to have been created the same day. Almost as if someone wanted to go unnoticed. As I waited at the gate, I noticed there were no other cars in the driveway. No party sounds, no loud music. Just a light breeze swaying the palm fronds and the kind of silence that doesn't suit Los Angeles. Then the gates slowly opened, without anyone appearing. I stood there for a few seconds, staring down that dark hallway toward the front door. No message, no movement. And then he appeared, walking slowly, as if he were returning from a movie set or a pirate-themed bar. He stepped slowly out of the shade of the porch, his steps slow and shuffling, as if calculating each movement. He wore a crooked brown hat, the kind that looks like it's been ridden in a hurricane, and a worn leather coat 2 sizes too big for him. He had more rings than fingers, too many necklaces for the time, and a crumpled scarf tied around his neck. If someone had told me he'd just escaped a Pirates of the Caribbean costume rehearsal, I would have believed them instantly. The scent of rum arrived before him, mixed with something between vanilla, cigarettes, and maybe nostalgia. He reached the passenger door, leaned against the roof of the car, and looked at me with a lazy smile. "Are you the captain of this vessel?" he said in a forced British accent. I just laughed. I thought, okay, the theater started early today. And I unlocked the door. He entered calmly, sank into the seat as if it were a throne, closed his eyes for a few seconds, and then let out a dramatic sigh, worthy of a Shakespeare play. Then he murmured, "Take me, driver, to the destination of oblivion." I glanced in the rearview mirror. And that's when I realized, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. As soon as the car started moving, he sat up straighter in his seat and stared out the window with the poetic air of someone about to deliver an existential monologue. About 30 seconds of silence passed before he said, "Did you know that fame is like a ghost? Everyone sees you, but no one really sees you." I said, trying to sound friendly. I figured he was one of those frustrated artists trying to rehearse a performance or something. But he continued, "Everyone thinks they know Johnny Depp. But no one knows who he is. Not even he himself." I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was smirking as if he knew more than he should. He continued, "I was him for so long, sometimes I forget who I was before." Have you ever tried to forget yourself, driver? I began to think it was a very well-done act. An impersonator, perhaps. A fan. Someone who made a living from it. But there was something in the way he spoke, a disconcerting familiarity. As if he wasn't imitating. As if he was remembering. He then turned to me with the most serious look of the night and said, "But what nobody knows is what really happened in 2003 on the film set of that project that never finished." That's when my curiosity overcame my tiredness. "What do you mean? What project?" He just smiled. The road grew quieter. And I realized this race was just beginning. He adjusted himself in the seat, looked out the window and said in a lower voice, as if he were sharing a secret that could put someone at risk, "Do you remember a movie called The Ninth Gate? Not the one with Polanski. Another one. A secret project, shot in 2003, with a cast that disappeared off the map." I frowned. I'd never heard of that. "Of course you don't," he laughed. "Because it was never released. And for good reason." With each sentence, he delved deeper. He spoke of a set built in the middle of an isolated ranch in Arizona. An independent production, but with a massive budget, financed by money that couldn't appear in the credits. It was said that the film involved rituals, royal symbolism, and that the actors began to go mad. One of them disappeared during the last week of filming. And the legend was that the script wasn't fiction. It was a translation of an ancient manuscript found in Prague. With each detail, I felt more torn. Part of me thought he was making it all up, of course. But the way he spoke, the pauses, the technical names, the behind-the-scenes terms, it was all too precise. He mentioned a German director who, according to him, disappeared from the market after that film. He said the soundtrack was composed by someone who has refused to work ever since. And that to this day, there's a silence clause signed by everyone except him. "I broke the contract," he said, looking out the window. "But after all this time, maybe someone needs to know. Even if no one believes it." There, I stopped laughing inside. "You see?" For a few minutes, I just drove in silence. He kept talking, but now he seemed less concerned with convincing me and more relieved to be speaking. As if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. With each segment of the story, he would name a producer, a studio, a location. He would mention specific dates, talk about deleted scenes, and the equipment used in the filming. I began to realize that this was much more than improvised acting. There were too many details to be invented on the spot. That's when he mentioned a guy named Derek Stein, an assistant director who was found tied up inside a trailer with script pages glued to his skin. I swallowed hard. That name sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. He noticed my silence, smiled slightly and said, "You're starting to believe it, aren't you?" I didn't answer. But the truth is I did. I'd had all sorts of bizarre characters in my car, but never one who so perfectly blended madness and lucidity. It was like hearing a confession. Or a warning. The strangest thing? It was the way he talked about Johnny Depp. He never used the third person. He always said, "I." As if he was tired of pretending it wasn't him. My head was a mess. Part of me wanted to laugh, to say it was just a drunk actor playing a character. But another part started doing the math. The voice, the way he gestures, the look behind his sunglasses. What if it were? Then he fell silent. An awkward silence. As if he'd said everything he needed to say. And left me alone with that. The city passed by the window in a blur. The streetlights, the flashing signs, the glare of headlights all seemed distant. Inside the car, only the low sound of the engine and the eerie silence it left in the air. He stopped talking. He no longer looked at me or even at the window. He stood there, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on nothing. As if he'd traveled to a place far away, inside his own head. And for a good 2 minutes, I considered breaking the mood. Saying something silly, asking if he wanted to stop for lunch, whatever. But something was stopping me. As if any word could ruin whatever was happening there. It was then that he spoke. Quietly. Calmly. Without looking at me. "I shouldn't have told you that. No one was supposed to know." He paused. "But maybe I just don't want to die with this story locked inside me." He turned his face toward me, finally looking at me through his sunglasses. And even with half his face covered, I could feel the sadness in his eyes. A tired sadness. Of someone who'd been carrying it for a long time. And then he smiled. Not that mocking smile from before. A short, melancholy smile. Almost an apology. At that moment, as absurd as the whole story was, I felt one thing: he wasn't acting. Not at that moment. The race was almost over. But it felt like something much bigger had just happened there, in that car. We were 3 blocks away when he stirred. He straightened, adjusted his crooked hat, and took a deep breath, as if preparing to exit an invisible stage. I slowed down and stopped in front of an old hotel with a faded neon facade and a sign that looked like something out of a 1960s film noir. He didn't say anything right away. He just opened the door slowly, as if the world outside was heavier than before. He stood with 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the car, looked at me over his shoulder and said, "You're a good listener, man. If anyone ever asks you, just say you met the captain, in the wrong seat." And then he limped down the sidewalk, rings jingling on his fingers, his coat flapping in the early morning wind. He passed beneath the hotel's awning and disappeared into the shadows, as if swallowed by the legend itself. I stood there, my hand on the steering wheel, staring into space. Feeling like I'd somehow witnessed something that shouldn't have happened. Something that wasn't in the plans for that night. I got home with my head spinning. It was almost 3 in the morning, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for a while, trying to convince myself it had just been another weird race in Los Angeles. The city is full of it. Performers. Eccentrics. Drunk screenwriters. Nothing special. But then, curiosity won. I grabbed my phone and started searching. First, the name he mentioned, Derek Stein. A few clicks and there it was. An assistant director who actually worked on a few projects in the early 2000s, then disappeared without a trace. No social media profiles, no current news, as if he'd vanished. I kept digging. That movie he mentioned, a canceled production set in the Arizona desert? I found scattered references on old forums. People asking if it had actually been filmed. A few comments mentioning strange things during the set. Nothing confirmed. No official reports. But there was a pattern. Scattered fragments. Details that, when placed side by side, matched what he'd told her in the car. It was as if he'd unearthed a real story, hidden beneath years of dust and silence. Even the name of the hotel where he got off was linked to an old film set rented in 2003. A producer reportedly used the place as a base for a few weeks before the project was abandoned without explanation. I found myself wondering out loud. But how did he know all this? And more importantly, why did you tell me? Over the next few days, I returned to this story repeatedly. During other runs, in the shower, before bed. It was like a catchy song, impossible to get out of my head. And every time I tried to rationalize, another detail would appear, pulling me back to doubt. Maybe he was just a drunk with a good memory. An obsessed fan who memorized half a dozen behind-the-scenes legends and made up the rest to amuse himself at 2 in the morning. Maybe it was all a brilliant performance by a frustrated actor looking for an audience. But there was something about that night that didn't quite add up. It was the way he spoke. Like he wasn't trying to impress. Like he was confessing. It didn't sound like fiction. It sounded like heaviness. And regret. What if it really had been him? Johnny Depp, hiding under his own character, tired of his own shadow, deciding to share a hidden truth with a random stranger, just to keep from exploding inside? Sometimes I think it wasn't about him wanting recognition. It was about someone needing to tell what they experienced and having no one else willing to listen. That morning, by chance, I was the right guy at the right time. I never saw that man again. I searched for him for a while. I returned to the same spot a few nights, parked near the hotel, waited for races in the same area. Nothing. No sign. No new races with the J profile. As if he'd shown up just for that one conversation, and then disappeared into the darkness, along with the secret he carried. To this day, I don't know what to think. There are times when I remember the smell of rum, the accent, the way he said, "the captain on the wrong sea," and I swear I get a chill. Other days, I laugh to myself, convinced I've been the victim of a brilliant prank or a typical Los Angeles collective delusion. But whenever I pass through that part of town, I glanced to the side, unintentionally, hoping to perhaps see someone with a crooked brown hat and a tired look in my eyes. And every time someone gets into the car drunk, wearing some costume, I find myself thinking, what if it's him again? What if he's testing people? Looking for someone who will actually listen? I don't know if I took home a brilliant actor, or if for 30 minutes, I was Johnny Depp's own driver. And you know what? Maybe it's better not to know. If this race made you think, just imagine the next ones. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There are so many stories you won't believe until you hear them. Thank you for staying with me until the end, and stay tuned for more stories like this one coming soon. Big hug.